As we move on to The Wolverine, which came out in 2013, that did not deter Fox from wanting to continue with this character and to continue with the franchise. Although Hugh Jackman had sort of flirted with the idea of maybe stepping away from the character after the reception of X-Men Origins Wolverine, but thankfully he did not. He came back for The Wolverine, which ultimately didn't come out until 2013, but the movie was being worked on in 2009, pretty much right off of the heels of X-Men Origins. Chris McQuarrie, who again we know is long been associated with Tom Cruise and the Mission Impossibles recently, but also has a long history with the X-Men films because he worked on the original X-Men movie as well. He was hired to write the screenplay for the Wolverine sequel in August of 2009. And according to producer Laura Schuler Donner, the producer for most of these movies, the sequel would focus on the relationship between Wolverine and Mariko, a character from the comics, the daughter of a Japanese crime lord, and what happens to him in Japan. And Wolverine would ultimately have a different fighting style due to Mariko's father having this, quote, stick-like weapon. There's going to be samurai, ninja, katana blades, different forms of martial arts, mano a mano, extreme fighting. She continued to say, we want to make it authentic, so I think it's very likely we'll be shooting in Japan. I think it's likely the characters will speak English rather than having Japanese subtitles. So this became very much the focus of the movie. They were going to place Wolverine in a Japanese setting, and they were adapting a very popular Japanese story arc that came from the comics. And now they were making the smart choice to really focus this on the character of Logan and to really hone in to actually make a solo movie and not weigh it down and bog it down with a bunch of supporting characters and other mutants. How did you feel about this being really the focus of the Wolverine, this Japanese setting, this samurai elements that they introduced, these ninjas, the Ronin sort of mythology that they attached to the character? What were your thoughts just about this pivot that they made to focus Wolverine in this different type of setting?
I thought they had finally got it. I think they had finally understood the point of what and who Wolverine is supposed to be. Wolverine in this film is finding himself in a different place, like you said, with all the Japanese things going on. There's no more 25 mutants, but there is a lot of cool shit to still look at. There's shinobi, there's samurai, the production design is good. Like the whole world now feels like something. There's a direction. We have one main tone, one main character with actual side characters who I don't think they give them all the depth that they were needed, but it was like, no, you're fueling the story of Wolverine, of what this is supposed to be and who he is. So I remember just being like, whoa, is this a real tone for Wolverine? And what's also so interesting about this movie, I think, is it does in rewatching it, I was like, this is really close to some rated R stuff. Like the way everything was going down, I'm like, y'all are low-key pushing the limits right here. Like it's not Logan, but y'all are really like, y'all close to what Logan ends up being. Like y'all are doing some really dark, gritty, violent things here. So I remember just being, I think, impressed that this was like a real reboot. You know what I mean? X-Men Wolverine Origins and the Wolverine. This is like, oh, we rebooted, but it actually kind of worked this time. So yeah, I remember being, again, pleasantly surprised, but also impressed with kind of the pivot they made, but also I think very happy with just that decision to for them to do it. Like you said, I'm glad they didn't stop at Wolverine Origins.
Yeah, at the time, I didn't think a ton about the decision, but I did remember thinking that it was cool that they were going to do this. I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and this is going to be different than anything we've seen out of the character prior to this. But a lot of what I feel about it ultimately came in the years that followed, sort of in hindsight, in recognizing that this was brilliant. This was just so brilliant to do because prior to Marvel Studios and the MCU talking about making a lot of their movies have genre-specific tones and taking influence from different films and different eras of films, you had the Wolverine really doing that in a pretty significant way in making this a story that's set in Japan and basically associating the Wolverine and the Logan character to the identity of a Ronin. And, in feudal Japan, a Ronin is a samurai who doesn't have a lord or a master. He's alone. Right. He's isolated. And the character of Wolverine by this point in time was very much that, because they made a very conscious decision to say, this is post X-Men. The X-Men aren't really a thing. Like, they've all been pretty much they faced their demise essentially, and they made that, sort of a double down approach later in Logan. But Wolverine is sort of walking the earth in isolation. He's very much alone, and he's also kind of grieving as well because he's lived such a difficult and hard life, and he's dealing with the loss of so many people that he's loved, and also the idea that anything he comes into contact with, he ultimately breaks and he destroys. That's also like
Yeah.
another idea that he grapples with. And so it's this dual identity between him being a monster and him being a man, him being this animalistic person, this violent person between versus him being somebody that can love and care for somebody. And so what they did here in introducing this tone and the style and the influences that they introduced was really brilliant because it makes it so different and so distinct from any other superhero movie because nobody's actually tackled this. And then they take it a
Yeah.
step further and they actually shoot a lot of it in Japan. And so those settings and the production design is incredible. They build these wonderful sets. Like when they can't film in Japan, they go to Sydney, Australia and build these sets that feel like faithful recreations. So this world that they've given Logan for this story, this tapestry that they've woven for themselves, it's really great stuff in hindsight to just recognize like there's a lot of forethought happening here. There's actually a lot that they're doing here that set in motion everything that would pay off later in Logan. So I'm just really, really appreciative that they took that step here and made it so different and did that sort of reboot approach, as you said. But it's interesting because this movie went through a ton of different directors. Like James Mangold, who we're going to get to in a second, ultimately is directing this movie and then eventually Logan. But initially, Darren Aronofsky was attached to make the project after Bryan Singer had turned it down, and even Hugh Jackman himself in October of 2010 had confirmed that Aronofsky would direct the film. They had a long-standing relationship with each other. It was scheduled to initially begin its principal photography in March of 2011, but eventually production moved to Japan for a lot of the shooting. And then by March of 2011, Aronofsky, he had bowed out of directing the film, and he said in a statement, quote, "As I talked more about the film with my collaborators at Fox, it became clear that production of The Wolverine would keep me out of the country for almost a year. I was not comfortable being away from my family for that length of time. I am sad that I won't be able to see the project through, as it is a terrific script, and I was very much looking forward to working with my friend Hugh Jackman again," end quote. Which I think, sort of signals a lot of like actors and filmmakers worries about being just removed from their families for a long time because you have to relocate and just like live this entirely different life. But Fox also made the conscious choice to say that they were in no rush to start production, because there was also a big earthquake and tsunami that occurred in Japan in 2011 that was very much devastating to the entire country. And by May of 2011, Fox had a list of 8 candidates to replace Aronofsky. That included Jose Padilla, Doug Liman, Antoine Fuqua, Mark Romanek, Justin Lin, Gavin O'Connor, James Mangold, and Gary Shore. Some pretty significant names there that would have all been interesting, I think, to direct the Wolverine. I'm not really mad at any people on that list. Like,
yeah, me either.
Antoine Fuqua, that sounds interesting.
That's interesting.
That's interesting to me. I think that's a great take. Doug Liman, Justin Lin, like
Doug
those are
Liman's
guys.
interesting too.
Yeah, I would not have been mad at those choices. Even Sean Levy was approached to direct this movie. He would eventually obviously go on to be the director of Deadpool and Wolverine coming out in a few weeks here, but he was approached by Jackman to direct it because they had worked together on Real Steel, underrated movie. People should check that out if they haven't. But Sean Levy declined to do it because he didn't want it. He only wanted to do original films, and he knew that this would be Jackman's 5th time playing the Wolverine character, and he was more focused on making original stories. And so by that point, in June 2011, Fox entered negotiations with James Mangold to direct this feature film. And we should talk about him because he's so important to this movie and so important to the tone and the style. And ultimately, I think what a lot of people would know the Logan character and the Wolverine character to be in live action moving forward. So how did you feel just about James Mangold's, sort of contributions to the character, just, thinking about this movie in hindsight and what he was able to achieve over the course of the 2 films he directed?
Yeah, he just recontextualized again what I think a lot of people thought about Wolverine as a character and what they were supposed to think. Again, of course, he is the main focus of those first 3, or one of the main focuses of those first 3 X-Men films, but they're still not his movies completely, right? Like there's still X-Men movies, still all these characters involved. But it's not until James Mangold gets a hold on this project where I think we're able to see like who this character could be. Like, because at this time we do have, I think, really cool examples of just cool ass Wolverine. Like there's a ton of solo Wolverine comics at this time. Wolverine and the X-Men have already happened. This is just so much out there. We're like, okay, but we haven't seen that Wolverine yet in live action. We've just seen these little snippets of what he could be. And I think James Mangold coming on just came on and I think understood what the plot and character focus should be, rather than this like huge superhero crazy movie, what that is supposed to be, of what a character study could be and what a character study could look like. And so yeah, I think it was so important that he came on and did that, man. He changed a lot of what this and of course Logan would be later on down the line, but this was a really, I think, welcomed start to what I guess the new Wolverine could be. And so what's crazy, I think even this movie, what we know from Wolverine from this film will carry on to what we see in Deadpool and Wolverine. You know what I mean? What the iteration of the way Hugh Jackman was going to play that character is and could be. But I think this was again a tremendous beginning to the start of that, I think, chapter in Wolverine's lore.
That point that you mentioned about character study is the superpower of James Mangold. That's what makes him different from so many directors, and that's why he was so perfect to step into this character and to lead this franchise for the next two films. I'm just such a huge fan of his filmmaking style and his work, all the way back to 97 with Copland. His work with Stallone and Harvey Keitel and De Niro and Ray Liotta in that movie. That's a film that's about corrupt New Jersey cops in a small town. And then he does Girl Interrupted. That's a biographical film about a woman, Susanna Kaysen, who has borderline personality disorder. Or Walk the Line, this other biographical film about Johnny Cash, you know, this famous country folk blues singer. Very much a focused character study on him. To even 3:10 to Yuma, which was a remake, but it's just about a guy who needs money and has to transport a dangerous theft, thief across a town to get money to feed his family. Like, these are all very much based on local issues, small issues that relate to the character, and they're not set against these fantastical situations and worlds. It's just about people. And yes, obviously the Logan and Wolverine character is a superhero. It is a comic book character, and he's been put in really fantastical situations. But what's always going to make any of these things distinct and elevate them to greater levels is the humanness and the human moments that we can find, and the fact that they just so happen to be these really iconic characters. How can you draw us in and make these very relatable human stories and give us very human stakes? And this story about Logan, like, yes, it's set to the backdrop of really iconic Japanese imagery and themes and motifs, but it's just about a man trying to uncover and really discover his identity and to come to grips with who he really is, and to accept that, like, yes, he's not a monster, and he is capable of love, and he is capable of redemption, and he doesn't necessarily have to lead a life of pain, for the rest of his life. Like, there's so many things that James Mangold is able to bring out in this movie because he is exceptional at character. That is what he's all about at the end of the day. So this is what the franchise and what the character needed at this point. And then to take it an even step further, I think we would see a lot of this really blossom in Logan, but they were already talking about the Western influences in this movie, and how they leaned on a lot of Western classics, because they associated the character of Logan as being sort of a classic outlaw Western character. One of the big influences for the Wolverine is the outlaw Josie Wales, the Clint Eastwood movie from the 70s, which sees him in that film pretty much lose his entire family. And I think in a stunning move, it's an incredible movie, but you see Clint Eastwood really turn heel. He does some very, very fucked up shit in that movie. And we hadn't really seen that because in the Man with No Name trilogy, he's an anti-hero, but he's still a relative good guy. But by that point, the outlaw Josie Wales, he had done so many Western movies where it's like, we have to see a different side of him. And I think we had to see the same thing with the Wolverine character. We saw him 4 times before. We got to give him different layers and different depth. And I think that using that movie as their North Star was brilliant, because we would see that really be a part of the DNA for Logan, even more so when it came out. Like the fact that they were already thinking about Western motifs and ideology, even in this film, in comparison and in conjunction with all of the samurai and Ronin stuff, was just incredible. It was really, really great stuff. We should talk about some of the other cast members. Hiroyuki Sanada is in this movie, which is, it's just amazing to see. Like, this guy's career has just been in so many interesting places. And even by this time, I knew who he was. I recognized him. I had seen him before, but now he's just so much more famous. because of just the work that he's done. And of course, this year we've seen him in one of the best TV shows of 2024 in Shogun. And he
Mm-hmm.
finally got a chance to truly lead a project. And he's led projects before, but on an American sort of standpoint to a Hollywood audience, I think that this film helped him become more notable to audience members who might not have been exposed to him. And it really sort of catapulted him to do even bigger and better things down the line. He's also been in the Mortal Kombat movie. He had a small role in Avengers Endgame. He popped up in John Wick Chapter 4 last year. So he's on a new sort of career renaissance for Hollywood audiences. But what did you think about his presence in the movie, especially in relation to the Logan character?
Yeah, like you said, I had already like recognized him by the time this movie came out. I didn't know his name though. I didn't know, I didn't know who he was. I was just like, oh, there's that
That guy.
Japanese
He's
guy.
he's a that
Yeah,
guy.
it's a Japanese guy. Yeah, there's that guy, and it was like, oh shoot, he's still as good as ever, but I still don't know his name. But it's still a welcome. Oh shoot, I'm happy to see him. And he has such I think a cool role in this movie. He really does get to play a kind of a cool villain. Is one of the more I don't know, toned down is the word. He's not over the top like Silver Samurai is or like Viper is. He's just the normal human. I have a sword villain that he in the movie, and I loved everything that he had to do here, man. I think he does such a good job of kind of playing that role. And him the way he looks at Logan in this movie is like, bro, you are an abomination. Like, what are you? You're ruining my family. You remind me too much of my dad. This is too much. There's too much going on. I can't do this. So yeah, I really like this character, and I thought, man, I mean, what more can you ask for from Hiroyuki Sanada except for a good performance? And I think he gave us that.
A great foil for Logan in this film, a great physical threat too, because you can tell he's
Mm-hmm.
an experienced master, an experienced, sort of samurai technician with the sword and the martial arts. Like, you needed a credible threat, and there was obviously a lot of goons at play as well that
It
were a part of
was.
this organization. But you needed somebody who felt convincing, and here's Hiroyuki Sanada, just because of the massive amount of work he had already done, he felt convincing. And that fight that they have, sort of in the middle, in the dojo, it's incredible. It's at nighttime, and that's where you see like Hugh Jackman's physique for this movie, which I think he was probably in peak physical form in this film. Like,
Hey,
he
bro, he's
he
pretty.
has never looked as jacked, no pun intended, as he
Yeah.
did in this movie. It's funny because before filming, he actually reached out to The Rock to get workout tips and to get bulking tips so that he could reach just a new level. And he doubled down on his conditioning. He doubled down on his dietary sort of technique to get in peak physical form. Sort of in the words of Jerry Lawler, he has muscles in places I didn't even know I had places. Like, when I see him in this movie, I'm like, oh my
That dude
God,
was.
you
Yeah.
look ridiculous. You look like a true superhero, like, again, peak physical form. But again, that just speaks to the commitment of Hugh Jackman. But just incredible presence from Hiroyuki Sanada and just everything that he brought. But like, he needed to be a foil for the character for sure. And then I also want to talk about Mariko in this movie, because she actually plays a love interest, really to Logan throughout the course of the story, and
Mm-hmm.
becomes very important to him as well. And we see that they grow and evolve their relationship because of everything that's going on with her father. Her father, ultimately wants Logan to trade in his power and his life so that he can extend his life. And so that becomes like a whole big subplot. That's really the reason he's in Japan, because Logan saved his father in World War II when one of the atomic bombs had been dropped. And so she comes in and definitely makes things a little bit more complicated for Logan, because he's also dealing with some previous issues that we'll get to in a second. But anything you want to say about her presence? Because I also want to mention too, I think she was also a first time actress in this movie. She had really not done,
Really,
which I didn't
I didn't
know.
know that.
It was watching the behind the scenes featurette that she hadn't really
Mm-hmm.
done any work, but they were just so impressed with her physical attributes, her ability to be physical in this movie, but also her dramatic weight that she could bring to the character, and just also her looks as well. She's taller,
Mm-hmm.
and so she really
She
provides a
is.
nice physical presence for Logan as well. But anything you want to share about just her presence throughout the story?
Yeah, I really like her, and in fact, to be honest, throughout all of Logan's, I think, love interests, Mariko was one of my favorites, if not my favorite. And there's a reason for that. She, in this movie as well, she helped him actually kind of grow as a character. She actually encouraged him to be a better person. She, you know what I'm saying? Like, she anchored the dude. She had his back. And so, man, I just really like every time she was in the movie, it felt like somebody who was going to make him better. And we don't get that a lot out of anything with Logan. Anytime anybody's around him, it's like, oh man, here we go again. Like, here goes somebody who's probably not good for him or somebody he's never gonna have. But Mariko felt like somebody was like, no, I think I like you. Like, you know what I'm saying? She wasn't gonna portray him like Silver Fox was gonna portray him. It was like, no, you really are here, you're well rounded, and you feel like you should be here. So yeah, I really like Mariko as a character, and I think the actress, I think she did a phenomenal job of doing all of those things, man. Yeah, good job on her part.
And by the end of the film, she ultimately is not somebody that ends up dying or ends up losing their life. Like, this is actually a
Exactly.
character that survives, which disproves maybe some of the negative thoughts that were in Logan's mind, that anything that I touch ends up breaking, anybody that I come into contact
Mm-hmm.
with I end up destroying, because all of the X-Men were pretty much gone at this point, and notably Jean Grey was killed off in the main stories of this movie. And they decided to bring back Famke Jensen to portray Jean Grey in this movie, but she was essentially just haunting Logan in his memories and in his
Mm-hmm.
dreams. But she was always at his bedside, always whispering things to him, like, just, I think, reinforcing some of those negative things that he was thinking, but also getting him to sort of question everything that had occurred up to that point. And it's funny because Famke had been she'd been killed off like twice in the series. Like, she died in X2 as Jean Grey, and then she died again in The Last Stand as the Phoenix, but they found a way to get her
Just
back here. Um,
dying.
but how did you feel about that? Because I remember seeing the movie. I can't remember, and I don't think it was, but I can't remember
Mm.
seeing her in any of the marketing material. I don't know if she was in the trailers. I felt like maybe getting to the movie, this was a bit of a surprise that she had come back, because by the time the Wolverine comes out in 2013, we hadn't seen her portray this character in like 8 years, and so it was a pretty significant return to the franchise for that character.
Was it's so interesting you bring up the marketing. I don't remember like the marketing for this movie that much at all. To be honest, I think it was a weird time for a lot of people. I think because X-Men had I don't know. It was just in a weird spot. I don't know. I don't know why that is. I can't remember any marketing material. But her part in the movie, I think it made sense. I love the fact that he was being haunted by her because he did in a lot of ways kind of killed the love of his life. Like that's the girl he knew he loved, and I think that's that character study we're talking about, man. They was on to something. You know what I'm saying? He needed that conscious piece of him to kind of haunt him of killing the girl he'd been looking after, he'd been looking forward to seeing all that time. He's like, dang, I had to get rid of her for the betterment of the world, so more people didn't die too as well. And I think that meant a lot to him. And again, eventually his relationship with Mariko. You're talking about people. I break everything I see. That's Jean. I broke Jean. Like, damn, I had to kill this woman that I love. Mariko, don't get too close to me. I don't need that right now. And eventually that comes full circle. And she's like, don't worry, I can handle myself. I'm not Jean Grey. I'm not gonna die. Like you said, she ends up living by the end, which says I think gives a lot to Wolverine as a character. It gives him a lot of okay, somebody lived that I touched. You know what I'm saying? So I love that she was she was definitely welcomed here. I think as somebody who was hunting Wolverine.
Yeah, and I think again too, in thinking about the unsatisfying ending of The Last Stand and how everything just played out. And we
Mm-hmm.
talked a lot about this when we discussed the movie a few weeks ago, that there was just not any room to breathe for the big moments in that movie, especially the dramatic
Yeah.
moments. Like, everything happened so quickly. Even Professor X's death, Jean Grey's death, or excuse me, the Phoenix's death at the end of it all just happened so
Mm-hmm.
quickly. It's like, we're not going to get any fallout from this. We're not going to see how anybody is dealing with this on an emotional level. Like, we just weren't exploring really the depths of the psyche of the characters in that way at that time with superhero movies. And James Mangold, he's funny because whenever you see him talk about these films and how he decided to take on Wolverine, he very much takes a lot of jabs at other studios and other films, because he's always harping on the fact that everything had become so spectacle driven. It was all about the spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about the fantasy and all about the fantastic things that could happen in the film. Where's the character? Where are the moments that we can really just truly examine, like, where somebody is in their thought process? And so he gave a lot of that in this movie by bringing her back, because we never saw Logan deal with that on an emotional level. Like, because Wolverine Origins technically, I guess, takes place before the trilogy, they can't really explore it. And so this was
Mm-hmm.
really the first time moving forward in the timeline that we can see Logan years after having to reckon with everything that's happened, all of the carnage, all of the
Right.
damage, all of the destruction, and really, really have to face that head on and ultimately try to grow from it as well and try to use that to continue to lead somewhat of a meaningful life afterwards. And so to have her back here, great choice. I will be honest and say, like, at the time, I remember watching this in theaters. I did go to the movies to see this one, and I remember
Mhm.
seeing her first pop up, and I was like, "Oh, more Jean Grey stuff, please no," because I just had the sour taste of the character in my
Yeah.
mouth from The Last
Mhm.
Stand. But then, as I sat with the movie and I saw how they utilized her, I was like, "Oh, that's actually really really effective." Like she's really there as a reminder to Logan about everything that he's been through, but of course, just like what he has to go through to reach a new level in his own personal life. And so again, it was just a great choice and a great way to bring her back here. Another thing too about this movie is that I want to talk about is kind of the third act of it. And I will say that the Wolverine, upon rewatch over the years, has become
Mhm.
something that I've increasingly appreciated more. I have
Yeah.
become more and more of a fan of it every time that I watch it. I do
Same.
remember that at the time of seeing it in theaters, I walked out thinking like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I really
Mhm.
got it. And I think that the third act kind of left me with
Yep.
somewhat of a bitter taste because
Yep.
it
That's
feels
what
like
did
we
it.
lost a lot of the lessons that we were utilizing in the first two acts. Because the way it starts in Nagasaki, incredible stuff. But
Mhm.
then the way we end with the Silver Samurai in the movie and how we sort of bring it back around to that whole plot of the transfer of the immortal power. I mean, it kind of became goofy, I think, by the end of it. Any thoughts on just like how things sort of wrapped up there and how we sort of, I think we had very much a grounded movie to start us off with and to take us through those first two acts, but by the end of it, it kind of felt like that they maybe got a bit ahead of themselves with the introduction of the Silver Samurai.
Yeah, because we had been, I think, again, I think all the cool stuff didn't need to be overthrown. Like, it's almost like the studio came in, or even James Mango himself, somebody was like, if we don't have some crazy comic booky ending, somebody's going to be mad. And it's funny because everybody that watches it, we all agree, like, no, we wouldn't have. Like, why couldn't I forgot what his name, Lord Shingen, just
Mm-hmm.
have a sword? Why couldn't he also just be like a regular samurai without the whole Silver Samurai, piece of it? You can be Silver Samurai and not have this big mech suit. Why is this a thing? And yeah, man, it was weird because again, some of the comic booky elements we got up until that point were fine to me. Like Viper and all the stuff she was doing, it was hella weird,
Yeah.
but it was also like it fit the movie to me. I'm like, you're kind of cool, actually. She's shedding her skin. That was kind of crazy, but still, I was okay with it. I was like, okay, let's not go any farther than that. And then mech suit, and you're just like, all right, we didn't have to do this, guys. We really didn't. All the samurai shit was already cool. Like, it's fine. So yeah, it's definitely the part of the movie, especially upon rewatch. It's almost like worse upon rewatch for some reason. It's something about it I watched and it was just like, oh, why did we go there? It just made me even more upset because I was enjoying it so much up until that point. It's just like, y'all went off the rails. Y'all did not have to go off the rails. But yeah, it's definitely the worst part of the movie.
Yeah, and when seeing it in theaters, I certainly checked out by that point. I'm like, oh my god, what are we doing here? Because it just felt so different. It almost felt like the same mistakes of X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, this
Yeah,
looks cool, the design is cool, but it
right.
doesn't it doesn't belong in this movie. Like, we don't need any of that in this movie. Like,
Hmm.
you're giving me this really really weighty character drama that is very much about this man without a master, without a family, without a home, and then all of a sudden by the end of it, we're more so focusing on electro mechanical suits. This crazy Japanese armor in a completely different town and setting that distinctly looks
Hmm.
different than the Japanese setting we had gotten for a lot of the movie, the Tokyo setting.
Mm.
Because even
Mm.
earlier in the movie, when we're in the dojos, or even like the fight on top of the train in Tokyo, incredible. Just like,
I love that scene.
oh my
That scene is
god, it's
fire.
so good and it looks so
Yeah,
real. Like they they
it
they
looks so
they did a
good.
lot of that practically to pull that off. Like, that stuff is just amazing. But then we just go to
Mhm.
this whole different town and we have this suit, and it just gets a little goofy. And I do remember walking out just thinking like, I just don't know what happened there. It just kind of went off the rails. And I think that
Yeah.
tainted my whole perception of the movie. Now, as we've gotten older, and of course having
Mhm.
this also stand alongside Logan and seeing like how much connective tissue there is, it's like, wait a second, there's just so much to appreciate here. That ending certainly does not torpedo the movie. Like, there's still
Yeah.
a great 90-minute movie here. It's just that the last 20 or so minutes just don't live up to everything else that they had established in the prior two acts. But still enough there, I think, to really really enjoy. And ultimately the reception for this movie was pretty fine. When it came out, it had a production budget of 132 million, so still really really expensive, but slightly
Expensive.
decreased budget from X-Men Origins Wolverine. At the North American box office, it made 132.5 million. Worldwide, it made an additional 282.2 million, for a worldwide total of 414.8 million. So when compared to the rest of the X-Men franchise, the Wolverine garnered somewhat mixed results in terms of its box office success. Its domestic gross is greater than the production budget, and it's still lower, but it ended up still being lower than the other five films in the franchise. And the domestic box office total was roughly $45 million less than the franchise's average. But overseas, it did really really well. It exceeded the franchise's average by roughly $75 million, and it's significantly more than any of the other X-Men films. So internationally, this played huge. It did incredible. And worldwide, it exceeded the box office earnings of X-Men Origins Wolverine, and it also had a lower budget. So when you just look at the numbers on the surface, it's like, oh, they did a really really good job here. And then on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 71% approval rating. Metacritic average score of 61 out of 100, and Cinema Score audiences gave it an A minus. And so from a financial standpoint and from even a critical standpoint, it's a pretty solid movie. It did enough for enough people to say like, this is decent. This is much better than X-Men Origins Wolverine. And this
Mhm.
is also coming off of the relative success of X-Men First Class. In examining this movie in sort of the 11 years since it's come out, like, does this feel like one of the more underrated comic book movies that we've ever gotten? Because it did well, but I still feel like people don't talk about it maybe as much as they probably should, especially because of how much it did to set up that next movie in Logan, which often gets a lot of the critical praise that we talk about to this day.
Oh, it's absolutely one of the most underrated I think we've gotten one. I think it was caught up in MCU noise, right? MCU is so loud and overbearing at this time, and then this comes out and it may be decent, but like the next MCU movie is around the corner. You're only going to talk about the Wolverine for so long, you know what I mean? So I think that's definitely one of the factors. But this movie, like you said, it did so much to set up Logan, to even get the opportunity to make Logan. You know what I mean? Like it had to be a certain level of success, and it definitely gets us there. But man, underrated is right, because if you look at, again, a lot of the landscape that we're talking about now with James Mangold and talking about the character study and what he's doing in this film, it is, I feel like filmmakers did look at this movie and go, huh, we could do some other things over here in smaller worlds. You know what I mean? Let's go over here and do that thing. In fact, even seeing, it's probably not connected at all, and it might not be an influence at all, but even seeing like Ronin in the MCU, or Hawkeye turn to Ronin, that whole thing feels like the Wolverine to me. Like the
Mm-hmm.
way it looks, the way it feels, it's like, wait a second, y'all got that from the Wolverine. Why y'all doing that? And again, I don't know if that's a real influence, but it does feel like that. And Wolverine did come first, so it's really interesting to see in hindsight how much this movie might have done. But yeah, I think underrated is absolutely right, man.
It's really important that you said that about the MCU, because now the MCU is the dominant power in Hollywood. Now they are starting to fire on all cylinders, because the year prior to the release of Wolverine, The Avengers comes out, and at the
Mhm.
time becomes the third highest grossing movie in cinematic history. It made 1.5 billion at the box office. It's like, oh my god, this just changed everything. And I think it skewed our perceptions of superhero movies, to be quite honest, or at least mine personally, because when the Avengers
Mhm.
comes out and I go see that in theaters, I'm in college at the time, in undergrad. It's an event. It's such a happening. So many
It's
people go to
lit.
see it. I remember going to the movie theaters, and literally every screen in the theater was taken up by an Avenger showing. And then we get out
Mhm.
and we talk about it, and it's incredible and it's amazing. And we're so excited about the future of the MCU, and it gave them all the confidence in the world to go ahead and greenlight phases 2 and 3 and ultimately what they did with the Infinity Saga. But the Avengers is such a spectacle. It's
It
so
is.
driven by spectacle. Now that movie
Mhm.
absolutely has a lot of character. That's why it's as great as it is, because you get the
Mhm.
character moments from Loki and Thor and Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Like all of that stuff makes the movie
Absolutely.
what it is. But that third act battle in New York City, it's like, this is what we can do now. This is where technology has gotten. And so you fast forward a year later, I think me at that time, seeing the Wolverine also, the action was good, but it's like, is it Avengers
Mhm.
good? Is it Dark Knight good?
Right.
Like, are you
Mhm.
giving me those goosebumps on my arm? Like the Rock likes to do the whole thing now, the goosebumps. I'm like, are you
Yeah.
giving me that feeling? And the Wolverine at that time didn't do that, but I
Right.
couldn't, I guess I just couldn't appreciate it for what it was, because
Mhm.
I do feel personally that my whole perception on what to expect out of superhero movies had just been altered so significantly by the Dark Knight trilogy and by the Avengers, because we had just
Yeah.
taken things to such an extraordinary level. And the character study stuff, I think it had to grow on me. It had to make me realize, like,
Mhm.
oh, now that we're getting dozens of these a year, all right, well, the spectacle isn't so great anymore. Like, I need some
Mhm.
death. Like, give me some vegetables in addition to all the
Mhm.
other stuff that I'm getting, right? And so I think a lot of people might have went through that, and I'm glad that this movie is starting to get more flowers as the years go by. Again, as it set the stage for everything that happened with Logan as well. I do want to quickly talk about the post credit scene here, the mid credit scene.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
we see the return of both Ian McKellen as Magneto and, probably even more importantly, Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. In the movie, 2 years after the events of the film, we see Logan at an airport. He returns to the United States and he gets approached by Magneto, who he instantly knows who it is, because only Magneto can really control the adamantium in his body. But then shortly thereafter, Charles Xavier pops up and they basically warn him that there's potentially the end of the mutant race that's upon them, which is setting up what we would see in Days of Future Past just a year later. And the directors of those movies, Bryan Singer and James Mangold, they talked about that they were able to really kind of pull this off because they just had a conversation with each other. They were making these movies at a close, sort of proximity towards each other. And this was kind of like one of the big first times in the movie itself that I think Fox was like, let's connect these things. Like, let's actually
Mhm.
tease out what's going to happen next year. And also, this is in the midst of the MCU, when the MCU was doing a lot of the post credit scenes to
Mhm.
set up the next movies. And so, did seeing this get you excited about Days of Future Past? Like, when you saw this post credit scene, and how do you sort of examine it in the context of that movie that will come out just a short year later?
This was a post credit scene that got me pretty hype. Ain't gonna lie to you. I was like, "Whoa, what just happened?" Because we had been so isolated, and this movie had been talking about Wolverine and isolation in Japan. I just didn't think I would see those characters at the end of this film. But then when you do see them, yeah, man, I do just remember just being excited for the Professor X and the Magneto that we know to come back, because I thought in my mind, I'm like, oh, if they here, it must be some real shit about to go down. You know what I'm saying? Like I thought, oh, we finna get something crazy. So I was excited to see them, and I like the way they did it too. I like all the lines. I like what was happening. But yeah, they got me. It was a surprise on a lot of different in a lot of different ways. I was surprised to see them, and I was surprised that there would be something else coming down the line too. So yeah, it was really dope when I seen it.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention that, Professor X hadn't officially been resurrected quite yet in the storyline
Exactly.
continuity. They teased it in the post credit scene of The Last Stand, but we didn't fully know. This was truly the first time we saw him back moving forward. He did have a cameo appearance in X-Men Origins Wolverine. Again, just pops up the end of the movie, and there's really bad CGI when he's looking at the X-Men, like the future mutants running towards the helicopter, and he's de-aged.
Why is he
It's
there?
just
Why is he
so it's
there?
so silly. But here it's like, oh wait, this makes a lot of sense. And the fact that him and Eric are together, it's like, yeah, this is serious if they decided to team together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, something has to be really, really bad. And I remember knowing Days of Future Past was around the corner. And of course, that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the more famous X-Men, mutant storylines. And this could potentially be huge. This could do a lot to set up, the next generation of X-Men films that we might see. But we're gonna get all into Days of Future Past in our next episode. The last thing I want to just quickly touch on with this movie, there is an alternate ending that wasn't in the theatrical version, but on the jet plane at the end, Yukio actually gives Logan a gift on the plane before they depart, and it turns out to be his classic cowl that we have often seen him wear in the comics and even in the animated series, the Wolverine cowl that in live action he has never worn. To this day, he has still never worn a cowl. It feels very, very, very likely that he's going to don it at some point in Deadpool and Wolverine, but up until this point, that they hadn't teased it, they hadn't really done anything faithful in terms of his actual comic book costume. And unfortunately, I think again a year later when we see him in Days of Future Past, they just go back to the black leather, or the black the black Kevlar. Very felt like it was very influenced by Nolan, but they actually felt like they were teasing out like a proper adaptation of the costume. Did you see this ending like relatively close to when the movie came out, or was this something that you discovered like years and years after it was released?
I definitely seen it. I think close to when the movie was about to come out. I don't even remember exactly how it went down, but I do remember being like, "Oh shoot, yeah, no, y'all doing something different here." Or like, like you said, it definitely felt like inspired at first, but what Nolan was doing. But I just remember being excited to see it. But I know for sure I had seen it before Days of Future Past that came out. Absolutely.
I didn't see this for years. I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea. I did eventually buy this movie on Blu-ray like many years after it was released theatrically. I didn't initially
Mm-hmm.
buy it. I actually think that this was like one of those movies that was streaming on Netflix pretty early, like in the early days of like Netflix's popularity in the mid 2010s
Yeah,
when it was really starting to
it's
gain
possible.
a lot of its
Mm-hmm.
power. It was definitely on Netflix because I did rewatch it at that
Yeah.
point, and I probably didn't buy it on Blu-ray until I don't know, maybe 2016, like definitely like
Mm-hmm.
years and years after. And that was the first time that I saw it. And I'm like, wait, they were planning to introduce the classic blue and yellow like that. That's crazy to me. That's actually like really, really crazy that they even like teased that out. Of course, it wasn't in the movie, so they didn't do anything with it to begin with. But
Right.
I found it quite interesting, and it's funny how that scene has come back into the discourse, especially after we first saw the reveal of the classic blue and yellow costume that's going to appear in Deadpool and Wolverine again for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like 25 years it took us to get to this place of him actually putting on that
Insane.
costume because they just often gave him black leather, black Kevlar, just very
Mm-hmm.
grounded, reality based
Motorcycle
stuff.
jackets.
Motorcycle jackets, all that stuff. It's like, okay, all right, you
Mm-hmm.
got your Harley Davidson on, but can I get the blue and yellow, please? Like we gotta
Yeah.
do something faithful here, but we will get that in due time.